Today we're going to talk about the first part of making an illustration, the visual research and our concept studies. Everyone's process is going to be a little bit different. We're all working on different ideas. So what I'm going to touch on today is the various strategies that I use to develop my ideas. So the first step is always to do visual research to figure out a time and place for your illustration. So in this case, our time and place, my time and place, is going to be ancient Sumeria. I went online, I picked out a bunch of images of Sumerian sculpture, pottery, architecture, interior design, if any such thing exists. And now I have it in front of me on my screen, and I'm looking at it. All right, so that's step number one, do visual research. Then choose a scene from the story. The scene I chose is when the cloth is first introduced to the king and he realizes that, hold on a second, I can't see anything. I read the scene, I take an inventory, I think about what needs to be included in that scene, how many characters, whether it's inside, outside, where is the setting, if it's inside. And then I start developing my concept studies. So what is my inventory? Well, that scene is going to include our emperor, definitely. It's going to include the two weavers who are demonstrating the fabric. It might include a minister or two, or some kind of court attendant, or, I don't know, ladies in waiting, I don't know, food taster, whatever it is. Maybe a few characters to people to populate the court scene. It's going to be set indoors, again, in maybe the throne room, or maybe the king's dressing room, possibly. Now, let's start developing our ideas. I usually start off with the characters. Let's start off, for the sake of argument, with the weavers. How do I start? Well, obviously I look at some inspiration. So I'm looking at Sumerian sculpture, a number of different ones. I'm looking at hairstyles, costumes, and then I'm going to start my design. So one of the sculptures has kind of a funny little character in it, with a very round face, like this. And then very squat shoulders and a big pot belly, like this, and tiny little feet coming out like this. Now, look, the style is going to be up to you. That's part of your visual development, but I think in this case I'm going to develop a style that's inspired by this really charming, really delicate Sumerian sculptures. I'm not exactly sure the size, but I'm assuming they're clay miniatures, maybe some kind of votive offerings. Not really thinking too much about the pose. What I want to do is just think about general kind of shapes. The fact that this character has kind of this jutting, very square chin, and then it has some kind of hairstyle. I'll show you an image that I'm working from. I'm not copying the thing, I'm just gathering information, gathering inspiration, let's put it that way, about its costume, the facial expression. Alright, so I've got this character sketched in. Think about the costume. Think about what kind of facial expression our character needs to have. These weavers they're up to no good. They're incredibly sneaky, so I'm going to give this character kind of hunched shoulders, and definitely would like some kind of very, very sneaky expression. Now, this is not ultimately the angle at which I'm going to depict my character. I'm not really concerned about that. I'm not thinking about what the pose is going to be, and probably in terms of pose, this is pretty bad. It's pretty stiff, right? I don't ever want to draw characters exactly this stiff. That would be a mistake. By the way, do I have to stay entirely faithful to the costume? No, you don't. But the idea is that I want my potential viewer to look at this illustration and have a really strong idea of the time and place. Maybe they don't know anything about ancient Sumeria. It's quite possible. It probably gets confused with Babylonia, the Persians, Assyrians, right? A big model of ancient peoples. However, they should be able to tell, aha, this is set in the Middle East and this is some kind of very ancient culture. Alright, so this is my first character. I've sketched it in. Usually I refine my characters a little bit, just so I have a little bit of a stronger idea of what forms are composing our character is composed of. So I'll go over my character with a pen. Look, the materials right now are not particularly important. Lots of different ways of creating quick rendering. I happen to like working with fountain pens. They're excellent sketching tools. They give me line variation. I'm going to change the shoulders a little bit. Because you had the option to make the characters animals. Make that decision beforehand. Decide what time and place the characters occupy. And then, most importantly, try a few different versions. So at least 10 of your concept studies should just be different variations on your weavers, or different kinds of thrones, if that's important. The number of concept studies is really up to you. This is a very fluid, flexible process. When do you stop? Well, guys, I gave you a finite number. I told you do 20 concepts and stop, move forward. You can definitely do more. The problem is, all of you guys are very creative. We've seen that already. You've proven it. This process could last years, decades even. You can keep developing ideas, so in this case, the sculpture is holding, I don't know, some kind of bouquet. Maybe this weaver is holding a spool of yarn. This is my version of a spool of yarn. Maybe it's got a thimble. Though I don't think weavers, that's more like somebody who sews. Something worth researching, by the way. And I think I'm going to give this guy a really sneaky smile. Usually these Mesopotamian sculptures have very large eyes. That's a common trait. Because the eyes are a window to the soul. Now these weavers are very sneaky, they're closed off. Maybe their eyes should be small. Maybe that's part of my concept. I don't know. Keep these relatively rough. Don't make them overly detailed. Definitely render them though. So how do you render them? Look, a number of different ways. I like, for quick rendering, to use these Copic markers. Again, how much rendering up to you, really. You can even keep these flat. But I think you'll find you'll have a better idea of what you want to do, how you want to develop your idea with a little bit of value. I have a range of these. I bought them for my product design class. I never used them in the product design. Had the product designers draw in traditional media. But this is very, very good for fast sketching on really crappy paper, which this happens to be. I'm going to change the hair color on this guy. Okay, so there's my first character. I might develop another version of him, but let's design our second weaver. Now, when I'm thinking about my next character, the most important principle I want to think about is variety. I do not want to make these weavers the same. So the initial shapes I put down are going to be very different from this. This character is kind of boxy. My next weaver might be kind of thin and wiry. So I might look for a sculpture that looks like that. I probably won't find one. Actually, these guys are kind of wiry looking. They're thin. So this weaver is going to be maybe a little more S-curved, like this. Again, I'm thinking about just simple shapes right now and making those shapes very different from the first one. So if this guy is kind of boxy, this guy is going to be more S-curved like this. He's going to be skinnier. He's going to have a long neck. Again, I'm constantly gathering inspiration. There's a really pretty little miniature sculpture that has a really interesting hairstyle. It's round on top, and then it has these kinds of rolled buns going this way. That's really fun. This guy's got a big nose. This character is going to have a little nose. Both need to be sneaky. This one is going to have maybe larger eyes. This one has a square jaw. This one has a pointy jaw. Does it make sense? I'm always trying to vary my characters because variety is a very important aspect in all art making. Variety of texture, variety of contrast. What else? Variety of shape, color, transparency. More variety I can include. Generally speaking, this is not always the case. The better your image is going to be. Trying not to repeat. This is something that is constantly used in art making. It's used in filmmaking, by the way. So going back to Laurel and Hardy, none of you guys are old enough, but back when I was growing up on Channel 5, there used to be reruns of Laurel and Hardy. It's a comedy troupe from, I don't know, I guess the 30s, the 20s. One was really skinny, the other one was really fat. One was really happy, the other one was very sour-tempered. And not that I ever found them particularly funny, but the humor came from the contrast in shape and character. The supposed humor, because I really never found Laurel and Hardy funny. Like, it was of its time. Okay, so I'm going to think about different costumes. So this guy's got a zigzag pattern. This character has some kind of wraparound. Again, I'm looking for inspiration, constantly looking for inspiration. Going this way, and then this guy has these kinds of shoes, and this character might be wearing some kind of sandal. Look, those of you guys that are animation majors, I'm almost certain have done some version of this, maybe even rotation. I don't know if you guys have had classes in character design. If you have, I suspect that your instructor has talked about this kind of stuff. So when you're designing multiple characters for a potential show, don't make your two characters the same. Look, if you're a casting director, you're not going to cast the same. An actress, two actresses look exactly the same, though that happens a lot. It's kind of surprising. No, you want to cast a brunette and a blonde, one that's tall, one that's short, so that our viewer doesn't conflate our two characters. And it's visually more interesting. So this character is going to be pointier looking. I really like how the sculpture has a little pointy chin, and the mouth also points that way. All these Mesopotamian sculptures have this kind of arched brow. I guess that's sort of part of their makeup. Maybe they pluck their brows. So this one has straight hair. This one's going to have slight curls to it. Very elaborate headdresses. This is a time period that is really rich with detail. There's a lot of art from the period, a lot of stuff to get inspired by. There's potential to make a really colorful illustration. Look, even body language, right? So this guy is very, very stiff, and this one we're going to make a little bit more slinky looking. What else can I tell you? Let me just quickly render this guy out. Again, I'm going to elaborate on these. They don't have to be perfectly rendered. They're just starting points. Once I get my compositions and I start working my preliminary sketch, then I'm going to start feeding these ideas a little bit more. Start developing a little bit more. Start getting more specific about excuse me, what I'm doing. Am I being completely faithful with these sandals? No, I'm not. I'm inventing them, basically. They look kind of Mesopotamia-y, possibly. Okay, let's render this guy a little bit. For no other reason other than really it makes our characters a little more concrete. And when you guys are making illustrations, you always want to set yourself up for the next step. The more concrete you can make this character, the easier time you're going to have with your compositional studies, which is your next step after this. Let's get some cast shadows going here. Let's go a little bit darker. Again, the level of refinement is, well, look, it's up to you. I always try to do a good job. I never botch anything. I hope you guys don't either. It has to feel satisfying to you. Does that make sense? We all have sort of some innate idea of what perfection needs to be, what the steps need to be. I never take shortcuts. I never take shortcuts, even if I'm being underpaid or the deadlines are tight. You know, learn never to make creative compromises. I think that's really important. Okay, so here are my two weavers. You can do a bunch of variations, so I can do a number of different versions of these, but I think the next step is to probably do some concept studies of a throne, maybe a mirror, maybe some little sketch of interior. Let me sketch something in, and then we'll do that step. All right, I've done a few more sketches of some of the characters involved in the scene. I think this guy might end up being a minister. Maybe this one might end up being a guard. I think my original intention was to design a king, but I don't know, somehow neither one of these is quite, I don't know, lavish enough, flamboyant enough. They're both definitely gullible looking, which is something I was going for. Again, the main thing I'm thinking about, the main strategy, all of you guys are working on different projects. I'm trying to make my characters different from each other so that there's a variety of different body types, different heights, different hats, different costumes, all within the same, obviously, thematic range. Do a couple of characters. How many? Up to you. How many variations? Look, these two might be variations of the same character. So both these guys could be ministers. Look, maybe I'll ultimately cast both of these characters in my little illustrated play. Once you do that, I would strongly advise you to also do some concept studies, concept development of your scene. So in this case, we have a throne room. You might want to do a couple of doodles, maybe even rougher than this, of some different thrones. Again, I'm looking at Mesopotamian artifacts, architecture. We've got some really beautiful friezes. For me, the visual research is really one of the more exciting aspects of doing this type of illustration. I don't know about you, but I love history, I love archaeology, I love creating these kinds of sort of pseudo-historical illustrations, and I really like the research part of it. So we've got a throne that is sort of Mesopotamian looking. I'm not looking at any specific image. I'm kind of combining a bunch of stuff together. The perspective in this is probably not entirely accurate. Again, I'm not concerned with that. I'll build the perspective later. Look, it might even include some elements that are completely anachronistic, not part of the time period. So some kind of backing that is cushioned, like this. I think sometimes these kinds of aspects, a phone, a Mesopotamian phone, or an iPhone, is a good opportunity for humor. So don't feel like you have to be entirely faithful to the time period. Look, this is not historical recreation. So some illustration for National Geographic magazine of the ancient Mesopotamians, where absolutely everything has to be approved by some kind of head archaeologist. I'm sure somebody who knows anything about Mesopotamian culture will have plenty of gripes and plenty of angry emails when looking at this illustration. Who cares? So long as it looks sort of Mesopotamian-y, I know that's not a word, we should be fine. Now, when I am designing this story, I'm thinking about who it's for. So the scene is as much part of the storytelling as the actual characters. So we want to think about what kind of throne would this dumb, gullible, incredibly flamboyant clotheshound emperor sit in. So it's got to be Mesopotamian-y. I know that's not a word, but it should also be lavish. So it might have some jewels on it. What else? There might be a really fancy Mesopotamian rug here. Maybe it's some kind of animal. Maybe it's turtle skin. Who knows? I'm also looking at secondary details. So there's some kind of ceremonial urn next to the king, and it has some kind of complex shape to it. Anything that you plan to include, I'm not sure what I'm drawing, I guess like multiple spouts. I don't know why. I don't know how this is actually going to be practical, useful, but developing these kinds of secondary details, also really important for your image. So look, let's render this out a little bit. I have a window, so what does a window in the Mesopotamian palace of this king look like? Again, I'm borrowing details from various friezes, architecture. This is, I guarantee you, 100% not authentic, but maybe there's some kind of drape here, and that drape has been borrowed from a frieze of some kind of battle scene with soldiers in it that have these kinds of costumes. Look, this could even be beards, right? Those kind of Mesopotamian looking beards for curtains. Fantastic idea. I'm going to use it. What else? Let's render this out a little bit. So again, the exact number, well, it should roughly be about 20. The balance of characters to details, completely up to you. Over time, as you do more and more of this kind of work, you're going to develop your own method of working, your own number, or let's say your own time span. So instead of a number, you give yourself a week to do this kind of concept development. But this part's really, really important. Again, we're always thinking about breaking the process down to steps. This is really what determines whether your idea is going to be fresh, interesting, funny, compelling. Most importantly, compelling, interesting. The amount of time, the amount of energy you spend developing your idea. So, for instance, the brilliant idea I had of these curtain beards. I'm really glad I thought of that, and now I'm going to expand on that idea a little bit. So maybe these curtain beards are going to be much longer and going to play a more significant part in my illustration. Had I not gone through this process of concept development, wouldn't have thunk of it. Let's put it that way. And I'm glad I did. I think it would add a nice little kind of background level of humor to the illustration. So again, I want to see about 20 of these. What counts as 20? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They don't have to be quite as detailed. In fact, they could be a little bit rougher. But this is a really important step. Do not race through this. Take your time. Do a lot of visual research and come up with some really great, funny, compelling ideas.